Hi guys, I wanted to provide you a little bit of, if you quote unquote, training for behavior-based interview guide and hopefully prepping you for an interview that you might have coming up. We have had this guide for a little bit, but it is one of those that takes a little bit of time to dive into and understand before walking into the interview. It's not one of those that you could probably pick up and read through and head into that interview and understand the guide completely. It is a very helpful tool. It's a great resource, but I do think you need to have a certain level of understanding of it before heading into the interview. This is not super structured as far as this training goes. I just want to kind of talk through the guide, what you can find in there, and how to kind of use it, and just talk through my experiences and hopefully get you guys feeling a little bit better about behavior-based interviews in general, as well as this guide. So I've got the guide pulled up. Again, nothing super structured here, no PowerPoint, just want to share the document and kind of scroll through it and help you feel a little bit more comfortable with using it. So you can kind of take some time and read through it. It talks about what is behavior-based interviewing. It is digging at the behaviors that someone has shown before and digging into those past experiences and using that as an indicator for future performance. So it's less, black and white sort of answers. It's tell me about a specific situation when this happened and how did you handle it and what did you do. Less hypothetical, right? Like what would you do? It's more about what did you do. So it digs into some of those past behaviors with the assumption that the past kind of predicts the future to a certain extent. So that's what behavior-based interviewing is. This guide is set up in this what we call the STAR format, and the idea is that you get the whole story. So the S stands for the situation. T is the task that the person was trying to accomplish. So task that they were trying to accomplish. A is the action that they took to achieve that goal. And R is the results. So as we go through some of the questions here in a little bit, I'll refer back to that. But the process is that we're looking for each piece of that in their answer. So we're going to ask a question, we're going to let them answer, and we're looking for the S, the T, the A, and the R. And if we're not seeing one of those, we're going to ask maybe a probing follow-up question to guide their answer into providing that missing detail if they don't give it from the beginning. So it is really important to read through these questions ahead of time before the interview and to go ahead and determine which questions you plan to ask. I think it's important for you to decide that before necessarily even knowing who you're interviewing, right? So you want to think about the job that you're hiring for, and you want to go ahead and line up one or two questions from each section that fit that job. Again, based on the job and the duties, not so much the candidates' resumes that you've already maybe seen. So I would take some time, walk through this, read through the questions, look at your choices. In general, I would only pick one from each section. I would only pick a second one if you just really think it is a great question that you really want to know the answer to, and it really lines up well with the position. If you're picking two in every section, you're about to ask 12 behavior interviews, questions, and that's a little intense, in my opinion. Especially because most people are not going to have a perfect situation to answer 12 different questions, for those 6 sections, and it's going to make sense when we go through it. So I think leaning more towards picking one from each section makes a little bit more sense. Again, feel free to pick a second question in one or two of the sections if you feel like it's a great question that you really want to ask. There is an evaluation process included in this guide. I think it's important that you follow that, and here's why. So I think it helps keep the integrity of the interview process intact. If you end up interviewing 6 people over the course of 7 or 8 days, right, and now it's, you started on Monday and now it's the following Wednesday, you're going to forget certain details of what the person shared in their interview. You might even forget how you felt when you were talking to them, like the connection that you made, and after 6 interviews and after a busy day in the OPCO. So I would use the evaluation process as you're asking the questions, and definitely getting that kind of totaled up after the interview so that you have a really true reflection of how you felt in that interview. So when it's next Tuesday and you're comparing candidate A and candidate B, you've got that black and white sort of detail that helps you remember how that discussion went. And at the end, your evaluation should either provide evidence, supporting your decision of who you're hiring, or again, supporting the evidence or the reasons why you're dispositioning someone and not moving forward. So it should help kind of give that evidence and proof that, that your gut is correct, and yep, this person really did outrank the others. And it also helps from a compliance standpoint. So when we upload these interview notes into the requisition, let's say it's 6 months from now and all of a sudden we're finding ourselves at an audit for our employment practices, it becomes very clear that we were following, we were following the guide, we were asking all candidates the same questions, and we felt that this person outperformed the other. And so when we choose the reason that we chose a better candidate, this is why, right? We have that black and white support. So let's go ahead and jump through, kind of go page by page here. Just a reminder, if you've never heard it before, questions we should never ask. So you can't ask things that would be digging for certain characteristics of their race, their sex or gender, or what they, how they identify, their sexual preference, religion, national origin. You can see this list here. So just a reminder, this is going to be in the guide. So when you get these printed off, when HR sends them to you, you're going to have this. So absolutely spend some time making sure that you are not planning to ask any questions that would hint at any of those characteristics. This just goes a little bit deeper into that. So, hey, don't ask age. Don't ask things that could help you figure out age, right? Like, when did you graduate? And how long were you out of school before you took that job, right? So be very careful there. It gives you some examples of the better way to ask. Like if it's a bilingual position, making sure that, okay, have you communicated in Spanish before, as a part of a job? You can ask that, not what part of Mexico is your family from. So it goes through some examples of how to ask what you're trying to potentially ask for the job, but how to avoid the things that we should not be asking. Page really 1 of the interview guide is a little, it's structured, but with this, I think that you can ask some of these questions in different ways. I don't think that you necessarily sit down and read these off and kind of have that robotic feel. I can kind of tell you from myself and my experiences, when I open up a conversation, I always tell the candidate, hey, I want you to tell me your story. And I tell them, hey, it sounds a little weird, but what I'm looking for and why I'm asking that is resumes are great. It does a great job of showing me on paper where you were and for how long, and high level what your job duties were. But most people have made career changes at some point, whether it's the company, the position, or maybe an entirely different industry. And those decisions didn't come lightly, for most people. There was life happening in the background that shaped those decisions or affected those decisions. And getting into some of those details, I think, tell you sometimes even more about the person and their ability to make decisions, and, whether or not they would change anything about some of those decisions starts to come out when you say, just tell me how you got where you are. Make your resume come to life, walk me through it. And if I've got questions, I'll kind of jump in. And I think that you learn a lot more when you give them the ability and the freedom to answer that question that way, because they're going to let their thought process and pattern kind of take them where it will, right? You want to see that they stay on task and kind of answer your question. But you want to, dig into, hey, when you walk me through, I want to know, why you left, or why you made that decision, or what was going on that caused that decision. And I always tell them, as we wrap up and as you get to the end of, walking me through, I want you to really dig into why you're looking right now. What's got you looking? what makes now a good time for a change, and I always get, these answers that you see right here, these questions in front of you, by just giving them the freedom to answer it that way and to kind of talk through it themselves. When they have that freedom, like I said, they're gonna share details that they might not have shared, or their mind might not have taken them to, if we just asked, okay, tell me about your current position. Why are you looking to leave? Tell me about the one before that, right? So they're going to answer those really short if we ask it in a short sort of a way. If we ask it in more of an open-ended way, you'll be surprised where their answer will take you. And you can take a look and see, if they haven't really maybe touched on, maybe they told their whole story and they're wrapping up and they think that they're done, but they really didn't dig into why they're looking to change now, right? Well, it's just an easy, okay, that sounds great. I can see, the development that you've had, and that kind of brings us to present day. So tell me a little bit more about what's got you looking. Maybe they just forgot that we had asked that. So it's not an interrogating sort of a feel. It's a conversation, right? So it's just, tell me about yourself, and you do that with dinner, dinner with friends. If you're meeting someone for the first time, you're asking some of those questions. Where do you work? And, oh, okay, that's interesting. How did you find that? How did you end up in that field? Right. So it's some of that same just conversational approaches. Again, I think you're going to learn a lot more, and I think you're going to get your questions answered without it feeling like an interrogation, and with people really starting to sink in and feel comfortable talking to you. And I think it sets the stage for the questions that you're about to ask. And it kind of gets the brain pumping too. They're thinking back, because they're telling you their story. They're thinking back to when they were at that job, and you're about to ask them questions about, certain situations that they encountered, and now they're kind of thinking about that, right? It wasn't 10 years ago. I mean, it's going to feel like their thought process was just there. So it's going to be easier to dig back 10 years ago to answer a question. So there are 6 sections, if you will, of these behavior-based questions. So the first one is adaptability. We're going to go through the other 5. Again, as a reminder, you're just choosing one question here. If you really like a second question, have at it. Just don't necessarily do that in every section, because you're going to end up with a very long interview with a lot of questions that they may not have a lot of examples for. So for adaptability, you've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, good questions that you can kind of steal from and just pick one. And I'm not sure that I necessarily mentioned, I may have just lightly mentioned a moment ago, we do need to ask the same questions to every candidate. Again, so sitting down with this interview guide before your interviews are scheduled, or, a couple of days before, pick your questions, take a highlighter, highlight or circle the one you're planning to ask. And that needs to be the same for every candidate. So again, it's based on the job and the duties, not the candidates that you're interviewing. You don't want to take a look at the resume and then think about what you're going to ask based on that person's experiences. You want to think about the job and make sure that you're asking questions that pertain to the job, and ask it to every single candidate. So let's say we're going to go with number 1. Tell me about a situation when you had to adjust to change, and how did you handle it? Just ask the question, let them answer, and take their answer, and start to think about, okay, did they touch on the situation or the task? Were they specific enough that you understood, what they were facing, right? What was the action that they took? Make sure that you can pinpoint that. And what was the result? Not everyone's going to be perfect at answering these questions. Not everyone is great at behavior-based questioning. And that's okay. The point is to make them feel comfortable in answering the question the best of their ability, and then following up with a question, not interrupting and say, even if you already know that they're headed down maybe a little bit of a path, still listen, make sure it's not completely, a tangent, 5-10 minutes, of course, but let them answer. That's going to tell you, number 1, what they kind of thought you were asking, right? So you might still get more data. But number 2, if we jump in and we interrupt and we say, wait a minute, let's say that they were answering the question as a we instead of an I. Instead of interrupting, let them finish the thought and then dig back in, right? So and they might have been more on a team. They might have been in an atmosphere where they've never really owned that situation. So we need to let them answer and then kind of follow up. So let's say that they were answering it as a we and not an I. Okay, great. It sounds like your team was able to kind of navigate that situation. Can you tell me a little bit more about what part you played or what ownership you had in that process? And maybe it's nothing, right? I don't know. It depends on the job. It depends on what the situation was. But the point being, let them answer and then follow up and make it kind of feel like you're just digging a little bit deeper versus the interruption and making someone feel a little more on the defense, because what you're going to find is that they kind of shut down a little. Then they start to struggle thinking about, the situations, and then you might start to get fabricated answers, right? You want to try to get an honest feel if you can. So, tell me about the situation that you had to adjust to change and how did you handle it? Let them answer. Okay, and maybe it's a perfect answer. Great, we move on. But if not, it's okay, that sounds good. Can you dig in just a little bit about what role you played in that? Exactly what did you do, or what did you do first? One of those follow-up questions. And again, depending on what they say the result was, if you're good with the answer, great. If not, a follow-up question, if you feel like they kind of answered it, but maybe you just didn't get enough, a good follow-up question would be, okay, did you receive any feedback after that result? What was that feedback? Or, something of that nature. So of course you're taking notes during this process. You're writing down what the situation or task was, what the action, was, and what the results were. And of course, taking notes kind of as you go along. If you're able to, if your personality allows for it, I would try to go ahead and check off your rating scale right now, before you move to the next question. It's in the moment. It's going to be your truest opinion. So if you can not overanalyze, which I'm guilty of all the time, but if you can just kind of, okay, here's the question, here's how you answered it. It actually kind of exceeded what I was expecting you to say. It's a 4. Or, yeah, I really had to guide them quite a bit. They really didn't answer the question that well. 1 or 2. Check it and move on. If you are able to. I totally get it if you need to take time, after the interview, but just don't let it be hours after the interview. Try to do this as much in the moment as you can. So quality work output, again, you're just picking 1, maybe 2, and you're seeing what maybe fits the job better. So maybe it's the number 5. Tell me about a time when you missed a deadline for an assignment. Again, you're listening for, and the question doesn't give you a lot of detail, right? So they may not answer it perfectly. So you're just listening for what the situation was, what the actions were, and what the result was, and maybe how they remedied the situation. So it's listening. Okay, great. If I'm understanding correctly, you said this. Can you elaborate on, the steps that you took and where you felt like maybe you could have done something differently, right? So you can dig in a little bit more. So you can see that these probing questions are the same for each section. It's just helping guide you on how to ask that follow-up question, and then how to just write down, okay, this was the situation, this was the action, here's the result. Again, how do you feel about it? If you can go ahead and kind of check it off now, it's your truest, opinion, and you're in the moment. Again, just don't let it be hours after the interview. Service orientation, same thing. You're only picking 1, maybe a second one, but just not every single section, picking 2. So how do you ensure you're meeting your customers' needs? You're listening for some specifics. That's a very vague question, so you can't expect that the person is always going to answer in the perfect STAR format, right? You can almost assume they're not going to. You just need to be prepared for how to ask those follow-up questions in more of a conversation, not the interrogation, right? So it's, okay, great. That makes a lot of sense. Can you tell me about, what your steps of follow-up are with the customers? Or, your question will probably be shaped off of their answer. It's hard to give you an exact, read this off of the paper, but just make sure that you're asking some follow-up questions to dig a little bit deeper into that conversation, and you'll be surprised what you end up learning about folks. Resourcefulness, same thing, pick one or two. Teamwork, pick one or two. And again, you're going to have these printed off, so not trying to waste a whole lot of your time here. Just sit down with your printed copies and highlight or circle the questions that you intend to ask, and make sure it's the same questions for every candidate. That's your biggest takeaway. Motivation-based, that's the last section. So again, pick one, maybe two, and you should have a total of anywhere from 6 to 12. If you're picking two from every section, that's going to be 12. It's a lot. I would maybe try to stick to less than, definitely less than 10, maybe 8, because you're still going to have some function-specific questions that you can add here. So this is just going to be more the things that you really need to know on if they can come in and do this job. So familiarity with certain computer software, or familiarity with a certain process or vendors, or, whatever it is, depending on the position that we're hiring for. These are going to be your specific, do you have some of these experiences that you would need to bring to the table to do a good job here? So you can create those own function specific questions, but it does have to be the same for every candidate. Just a reminder for the 4th time. If you need more than 4, by all means, print off another copy of that sheet and throw some more in there. But just keep in mind that those behavior-based questions, they're heavy, and they're sometimes tough to answer because you don't always have that perfect example and you're trying to think about how it applies. So just think about the length of the interview and what really makes sense and what you really need to find out from candidates, and feel free to ask. And then you've got your evaluation sheet, which at the end of the day, again, it should either support what you're already feeling is the right move, or support what is a wrong move, right? So you're going to come in and you're going to write, well, they scored a 3 here and a 4 here and a 2. You're going to put their ratings here from the sheets above. You're going to average it. So add them up, divide by 6, get your average. So we got to do some math. You got to think about, carrying the 1 and all of that fun stuff. So put in the rating, add them up, divide by 6 to get your average, and you're going to fit here, somewhere in here. And then you've got, maybe 4 or 5 of these sheets laid out. You already kind of have maybe a gut feeling or two. You're having trouble deciding. This can help determine if there needs to be another interview with a different group of folks, or just meeting, or maybe walking through the facility. Again, it depends on the job and what it is. So it could be a clear answer. This is going to get uploaded into Brass Ring, so this also helps us for audit purposes. If we're saying, again, that we chose a better qualified candidate, this is proof of that. This is their ability to answer these questions. These are some of the key competencies that we're looking for, and this is how they were able to support their answers, and they just outperformed in the interview process. Again, so this is not to sit here and make the process any harder than it sometimes already is. It's just a CYA type thing, compliance, right? And helping support your gut feelings, right? So it's just kind of putting on paper what you already probably know or feel, and it should help you through some of those thought processes, especially, like I said, if this interview process is going to take a week and a half and it's been 7 days since you met the first person, this will help hopefully take you back to that time when you were meeting with them. And yeah, they really did kind of blow me away. That sort of a thing. So please don't think of it as an extra layer of difficulty. Just think of it as a way to support your answer and really kind of confirm what you were already feeling in your gut. And at the end of the day, protect us in a compliance standpoint. So not really difficult. Honestly, when you really break it down, it's just a little overwhelming if you pick it up and you walk into your interview. It's a lot to try to read through and interview someone, because it does take a little bit of preparation. Once you've done this once or twice, this is going to be something you can do in your sleep, I promise. It's going to become a lot more natural, and it's going to be a lot more conversational, I think, than what you might be used to in the past. But just if you can embrace it and, again, read through it and prepare a day or two in advance, then you're not going to feel as overwhelmed as, again, picking this up off the printer and walking into the interview. I don't think this would be successful in that sort of environment. So hopefully, if you're doing, got an interview coming up, your HR folks have sent you this link so that you can watch this video, and maybe you've got the print off there next to you. Go ahead, read through the sections, pick 1 or 2 questions, highlight or circle, and print off several copies. And you're going to do a great job. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. I'm always here to help, or be your sounding board or give advice, but I promise that everybody can do this. It just takes a little bit of practice. So let me know if you need me. Reach out to HR as well. They have experience in this, and hopefully this is helpful and was a good use of your time. So good luck and happy hiring.